My name is Marilena Marchetti. I'll be moderating the discussion. I'm a co-director, co-filmmaker of two films about methadone documentaries, Swallow This and Liquid Handcuffs. And we have some amazing speakers today. First, we're going to start with Corey Davis, who will tell us about what exactly the new rules are. Then we're going to hear from Mel B to give us a patient's perspective on those things. And then we'll hear from Janet Urdahl. She's the former executive director of a methadone clinic to tell us that perspective. And then Helen Redmond will talk about why SAMHSA isn't coming to save us. And I just want to say, we're doing this webinar because this is a pretty big deal, this SAMHSA rule change, and there's been a lot of discussion about it. And those of us who are sponsoring this, Pain, Filter, and the Methadone Clinic Abolition Collective, believe in a transition to clinic abolition. And we wanted to share from that perspective our take on this SAMHSA rule change. Now, I'm not saying everyone on this panel believes in a transition to clinic abolition, but those of us that felt it was important to speak from that perspective are the ones that initiated this webinar. So thank you so much for joining us. After we hear from our panelists, we'll have time for discussion. And of course, we would love to hear people's thoughts, disagreements, questions, following our presentations. So with that, we will hear first from Corey Davis.
Great, thanks so much. I am really happy to be here. My name is Corey Davis. I am a public health lawyer. I run the harm reduction legal project at the Network for Public Health Law. And I definitely think that people shouldn't be required to go to an OTP to get methadone. Let me share my screen here. I've got a few quick slides. Can someone just give me a heads up if you're seeing my screen here?
Yep, looks great.
Perfect. Okay, so here we are. So obviously there's a lot going on with the rule. I'm not going to go through all of it. There are already some good explainers out there on the web, and I'm happy to answer more specific questions via email, but you're just going to go over the very, very broad points here. So technically this is a 42 CFR Part 8 final rule. It is effective April the 2nd, although OTPs and states have 6 months to put some of it into effect. But we're going to talk about it as though it's currently existing. So yeah, it's better than before, but it's still not great, I think is the takeaway here. So I'm going to quickly talk about, like I said, the big picture changes. I mean, the admission criteria has changed. It used to be for adults, you needed to be, have addiction for 1 year. That's gone. Now it's just basically you need to have OUD and be appropriate for methadone treatment. Also loosened the requirements for minors. And we call it, the law defines sort of like maintenance treatment and interim treatment. It's now easier to qualify for this kind of interim treatment. Now you still need to have this these medical examinations. You need to have this initial exam before you can start. Then you have to have the full suite of exams within 2 weeks. So that's better. It used to be that you had to have them beforehand, but you still need a full physical exam, mental exam, and psychosocial exam. Now, those don't need to be done at the OTP, right? They can be done by an outside provider, and they can be done via audio-visual telehealth, right, for methadone. So that's better, not great. Same with dosing. Right? As I'm sure most people on this call know, it used to be limited to an initial dose of 30. You could go up to 40 on the first day. Now the rules are kind of more wishy-washy, right? The initial dose is supposed to be tied to the individual patient, which makes sense. The first day dose does still have this kind of soft limit of 50 milligrams. It says 50 milligrams unless the prescriber can, document exactly why it needs to be higher. So again, better, but still a lot of room there for OTPs that, want to say, well, you can't go higher than 50. to do that. The new rules explicitly permit split dosing, which is something that advocates had asked for. The old rule was kind of ambiguous about that, and most people interpreted it as not permitting that. The new rules on guest dosing are also much better. The old rules, prohibited treatment in any OTP except, your home OTP in exceptional circumstances. The new rule is much more permissive. It still, wants you to have a home OTP, but it says that, you can get guest dosing basically if you need it, if you have to travel for work or family. Again, a lot of this is going to, the devil is going to be in the details of how this is implemented, but the rule is a lot better. Okay, so counseling requirements, right? Like, it was never a requirement that it was never a federal requirement that you get counseling at the OTP as a condition of getting methadone at the OTP. A lot of people, even like people who should know better, like people who work at clinics, seem to think that that was a requirement, but it never was. So the new rules don't actually, remove that requirement, but they do specify this thing that I think is really important. They say refusal of counseling shall not preclude patients from receiving MOUD. So this is one of the few places where the rule explicitly says, like, you cannot kick somebody who otherwise qualifies for, methadone at the OTP out because they don't want to get counseling, right? So this is like one of the few, possibly, things that you can actually point to the rules and say, no, the rules say you cannot do that. So I was really happy to see this. Now, drug tests are still required, and the number wasn't changed. It used to be 8, it's still 8. Under most circumstances, there's a little asterisk, but in most circumstances, the OTP is required to give everybody at least 8 random drug tests a year. They did add this language that say drug testing should never be used punitively, but it's not clear what that means. It's not really enforceable because it never says. And by that, we mean that if somebody has a positive urine, they can't be administratively discharged or any language like that, So it's good to see that language, but it's not clear how enforceable, if at all, it's going to be. I know that Helen is going to talk a lot more about the take home, what criteria you need to meet to qualify for take home. So I'm not going to get into that. But I do think it's important to highlight, the changes in when you how many take homes you're allowed to get when. I mean, these are really big, right? As I'm sure everybody knows, under the old rule, basically you had to, you were basically going to come in every day, right? So the new rules, allow you on the first day to get up to a week of take home. After 2 weeks, you can get 2 weeks. And after a month, it goes up to, basically a month, 28 days, and stays there, right? So at least on paper, these are much better. These are much more permissive. Now, again, states can impose more strict limitations, OTPs can impose more strict limitations, but the rule itself is much better here. And just to note, I pulled this this graphic from a Vital Strategies report. So if you're interested, please go check them out. They have more information on all of this stuff. Yeah, so as I've been alluding to, we have what we call this preemption problem, right? Which is that these regulations just say, OTPs, you must impose limits that are at least this strict, right? We call that a floor. They're not a ceiling, right? They don't say, OTPs, you cannot impose restrictions that are greater than what's here, right? And that's a big problem, right? Because that means that states, in some states, even localities, and definitely the people who, people in corporations that run OTPs can impose limits other than those present in the regulations, right? So the new regs are only as good as their implementation. There was this good article just yesterday in Stat News about how private equity firms have been buying up OTPs. Why? Well, because they're cash cows, right? Because, and partly, largely, they're cash cows because you can impose requirements that people get counseling, that they come in every day, and you charge for that, that they have, excessive urinalyses and you charge for that, right? So the incentives for private equity are going in totally the wrong direction, right? Because they get paid in general when they see you, so they want to see you as much as possible, which is the opposite of what folks generally want. Now, HHS could change that, right? Like they could change those regulations from being a floor to being a ceiling. They could just do that in the regs. There's also lots of ways that you can do that with funding, right? Like, Medicaid loves to, kind of try to push people into doing things that they wanted to do by saying, look, we're only going to pay for this if, you do certain things. So, there's lots of levers that that the federal government could pull here. Yeah, and I mean, I think this is also like a really important point that I think a lot of advocates are aware of now, but maybe weren't before, which is that none of these rules are required by the statute, right? The statute just says that the Attorney General, in coordination with HHS, create a special registration, right? It's like you need to create a special category, basically, for OTPs. But the actual statute, the thing that Congress passed, doesn't say anything about, oh, you need to get drug tests and you need limits on take homes and all of this stuff. Like the agency just made all that up. Like they just made it up. So like they had very restrictive rules. They now have less restrictive rules, but they don't need rules at all, right? Like they could have just done away with all these things and they chose not to do that. Like that was a choice, right? So I just keep that in mind. Like every time you're talking to them and they're trying to talk about how great it is, like, no, like you still have these totally arbitrary and unnecessary limits you could have just done away with. So I'm at time, so I will stop there. But I think that's my take home point, right? Like better than before, but not nearly as good as they could have been. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Corey. That was a great presentation. Thanks. So now we're going to hear from Mel B, and Mel's going to share her take on all this from a patient perspective. Oh, hold on, babe. You're muted. Let's see.
I think I did that. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. Hey, guys. I'm Mel. I'm a methadone patient in Virginia, and I've been trucking me and my friends back and forth to methadone clinics probably for the last 15 to 20 years, so I'm pretty familiar with it. And as great as all these regulations sound, if you have ever been a methadone clinic patient, you know that this is far from the reality of what happens in these clinics. And the fact that we're spending so much time, on like SAMHSA regulations when they're not even enforceable, when the problem, why are we trying to fix like a carceral system is what I just keep going back to, because methadone clinics are carceral. I mean, we have constant urine drug screens. Like you heard him say, 8 urine drug screens a year. My clinic drug screens weekly. Like we barely have any patients with any take homes. I didn't even hear about COVID relaxations until maybe like 9 months ago. Like nothing changes. People don't understand that just because these regulations are changed or this is, loosened, like unless they're enforceable, the clinics do not care. They're not going to change. If they're profiting and nobody's telling them they can't do this or that, they're going to keep doing the same thing. Like, so I wanted to, reinforce that, and just about how carceral they are, like armed security. Most often like off-duty police officers, and they're not protecting, most of the time they're not protecting us as patients. They're protecting the OTP staff, which I mean but they're protecting them from us, like the patients. For for example, just a couple weeks ago, I was assaulted by another patient at the clinic. And the security guard, I mean, basically did nothing, took her outside. But when I was leaving, she basically jumped me and broke my glasses. Luckily, my ride was right there and I could just get in and leave. But it's like the things that we deal with on a daily basis to go and get our medication, is insane. And I just feel like when the focus is on these, like, why even SAMHSA regulations? Like, I feel like that's an alternate reality from what goes on in these OTPs. And I don't know why we're not trying to figure out an alternative to OTPs. We can't fix, how do we fix that? Like, we always say we can't fix jails and prisons or police. Like, it's the exact same with the clinics. Like, it's a carceral institution. So I really feel like the medical field and researchers have really reinforced these narratives of conceptualizing drug use as abuse and problematic. But it's like methadone is no different than any other drug in the pharmacy. And I just feel like the medical field needs to step it up a little bit, and we can do better than this. It's and it feels like this is people are cheering for this. And when I talk about it, you're like, oh, you're just being negative. It's going to help a few people, but that's not enough. How can you say that how can you understand how the clinics work, understand how all these regulations work, and sit back and say, yeah, this is good. I don't understand that, because that's not good enough for me. And wasn't good enough for all of my friends that I buried. So yeah, I just challenge everybody to do better. And let's be real. Come to the clinic with me one day. I'll show you. It's nothing it's just an alternate reality from what you hear these SAMHSA talking about, or the AATOD. It's just insane, and we've got to do better. We can't, year after year, we can't keep talking about methadone reform. There hasn't been methadone reform in 50 years. We just got to do better. So yeah, thanks for hearing me out.
Thank you so much, Mel. And thank you for reminding us that people are literally dying because of these rules and the failure to protect people, and for the naming of the system as an alternate reality. That stuck with me. Thanks, Mel. So now we're going to hear from Janet Urdahl. And just tell us who you are and take it away.
And so I'm Janet Urdahl. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm also a addictions counselor. I've been in the treatment business for about 40 years. I so greatly appreciate what Corey has said and what Mel has said. A year or so, or 2 years ago, I was hired on as a consultant to rescue a methadone clinic that was about to lose its license with the state of Delaware. That's where I work now. They were not in compliance, because what happens in Delaware, there's the OTP regs, but then there's also the outpatient regulations that they have to comply with. And they were, were on a provisional license. And so my job was to come and help them get their license back. I had never worked in a methadone clinic. And I will tell you, within the first week that I was there, I was absolutely shocked at what went on there, how clients were treated. This whole business of literally people standing online in the pouring rain at 3 o'clock in the morning to be there when they open the door at 5 o'clock. who treats patients like this? This is a chronic illness like any other chronic illness. Why don't these folks get to just go get a prescription and fill it like everybody else with a chronic illness? It is an extremely punitive system. Corey and Mel are both the people, they make up the rules. The clinics make up the rules as they go along. And if you don't follow the rules, then you're non-compliant and you will be punished for that. And no matter what client I would speak to on any given day, they would never know if they were going to get their methadone that day. If there was something that they were going to catch them doing, if they didn't see their counselor or they didn't go to group, or they came up positive for something that really would have no impact whatsoever on their methadone. They just never knew. So there's this constant state of anxiety that these folks live in. When I came into this, it was kind of already into COVID, and Delaware did not close any of their clinics. New York seemed to have done something really good by delivering methadone to folks, and that seemed to work out pretty good. We did not. I didn't understand why people couldn't get even 2 days take home. Most of the people at the clinic I was at on dailies. I got there that we had 200 clients. By the time I left, we had 400, and almost everybody was on dailies. It was near impossible to get even a week's take home. And so the first thing that I did when I got there is I said, no more weekends. You give people at least 2 days and give them the weekend off so they can feel like they have some sort of a normal life, if that's even possible. As a result of that, the owner of the clinic, and she didn't fight me on it, but they lost a huge chunk of money by not being open on a Saturday because they get $20 a head for every dose of methadone they distribute. And so that's a big chunk of money, especially over time. But, I was allowed to do that. It was a for-profit clinic, as all the clinics in Delaware are. So there's no benefit to the clinic owners to not have people show up there every single day. The other thing that really bothered me was that the treatment staff at the clinic were not qualified to treat the people who really needed treatment. Not everyone on methadone needs therapy, and they need therapy, not counseling. And the people that they hire to provide this treatment, it could be anybody. When I got there and I interviewed staff and I was looking at resumes, and I went to this woman, one of the newest hires, and I said, why did they hire you to work here? What's your experience? And it turned out that she had been a dancer in a local bar. And I said, what qualified you to have this job? She said, I don't know. And she was a counselor there. And so this is the kind of stuff, and because they had to have a certain client to counselor ratio. So, anybody could walk in off the street and be a counselor there. And it was just so abusive and so controlling. It kind of reminds me of prison when you have people who have control over a vulnerable population. They can do whatever they want. And let me tell you, the nurses were the worst. The nurses were the worst because if people got to that window and were the least bit agitated and said something that might have felt off color to the nurse who was about to dispense, well, guess what? Not only are you getting drug screened, you're going to go sit out in the waiting room, and you're going to go see your counselor, and then we're going to think about if we're going to give you your treatment today. And this happened every single day. So nobody ever knew. And they almost enjoyed being able to have that kind of control over people. And it was just, to me, it was very sad. After a while, because I have a license, because I have to uphold a certain code of ethics, and I could not make it happen at this clinic, mostly because I had no control over the nurses. They run the clinic, they run the pumps, they run the ordering. And if they dig their heels in and they don't want to do something, then I was out of luck. There was nothing I could do. Medical director, nice guy. But I mean, he had nothing to say about, but he showed up, once a week and did what he did. But, he was there because they needed a medical director. But, it was interesting in these new regs, how much they talked about expanding the a number of people who can dispense or to order. And that's great. That's great. But, it's nowhere near enough, and there's not enough people on board to be willing to take on this responsibility. So, overall, it was one of the most saddest experiences in my career. I actually want, and I'm going to wrap it up here, but I actually wanted to go to our local congressmen here in Delaware, because they don't know. No, people do not know what happens in clinics. They do not know, these methadone clinics. But the clients are so afraid that they're going to lose their methadone, they don't want to say anything. So I couldn't even get a group of clients to say, come with me and let's talk to, Representative so-and-so. Let's get them to start understanding what's going on. They were too afraid, and they would not do it. So it was just, it was a no-win information for the clients. So anyway, it is a huge money-making operation, millions of dollars a year in some clinics, and the people who need to be benefiting from this are not, and there's huge stigma attached to people who have to come to a methadone clinic. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. The reality y'all are hitting us with is overwhelming. I'm not going to lie. But it's to all of our benefit. So thank you for sharing these heartbreaking stories with all of us. Oh boy. So Helen Redmond will be our last speaker. Introduce yourself and then take it away. And then I see some Q&As, some questions piling up, and we'll get to all those after Helen speaks.
Okay. I'm Helen Redmond. I'm a journalist and a filmmaker, and also along with Janet, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So I want to talk about, can people see can people see the updated? Okay. I want to go through them because I don't think enough attention has been paid to this updated criteria. People are really focusing, and it's understandable, on the sped up timetable of how many take homes you can get. And for people who take methadone, that's real. As many as you can get as fast as you can. But there's still criteria that is going to be used to assess whether you can get them. And SAMHSA was really clear in the updated final rule about who is in control of making that assessment. And this is, and I'm quoting from the final doses, rests with the treating practitioner and their use of clinical judgment. So someone from the clinic is going to be looking at these 5 criteria to see if that person can in fact get take homes. Let's look at the first one. I'm not going to read it. People can read it for themselves, but just point out the first part of it, which is absence of active substance use disorders. This is a real issue. We know that for some people who start methadone, they're using other drugs. Some could be legal, some could be illegal. There's a story, it recently came out. Stat News did this great video. People should see it. And so a woman who had been taking methadone for a very long time drank some alcohol, and the next day went to the clinic, was drug tested. The alcohol was in her urine, and she lost all her take homes. And so really, most clinics have an abstinence perspective. I know that sounds a little strange, but they don't want people using alcohol. They breathalyze for that, UAs, cannabis in states that it's legal for recreational adult use. So this first criteria is going to knock a lot of people out because, again, some people are still using other substances, both legal or illegal. The other thing I want to point out here is you know, you often see the word safe, safely. And I think this really speaks to how people who take methadone are not trusted. They're not really trusted by staff. Safety, also potential for overdose. This is all over the regs. So number one, I think, is going to knock quite a few people out of being able to get a lot of take-homes. Number two is attendance. So this is a huge hardship for people, right? I challenge anybody here, part of this webinar, to get anywhere 7 days a week, right? Cars break down, transportation doesn't show up. And this really harms people because it's not their fault that they can't get to clinic. And yet, if you don't have regularity of attendance, and I take this to mean you can't miss any days, you're not going to get take homes. Number three is really about the DEA. All right. The DEA is always talking about two things when it comes to people getting more methadone to take home. They're always talking about overdose, and they're always talking about diversion. And the reality is the DEA does not care about overdose. If they did, decades ago, they would have relaxed rules around getting methadone to make it easier to get methadone than it is to get fentanyl. And so the DEA, when they talk about overdose, it's important to look at what they actually do, right? We are in a historic overdose crisis. We've never seen this number of people dying from overdose. And so they're not concerned about that, because if they were, they would have done something. And then diversion, that should not be what we're concerned about, is diversion. What we should be concerned about is getting methadone to more people. So number three has potential to limit who can get these take-homes. Number four, I always find this really interesting: safely transporting and storing medication. No other medication, actually no medication is subjected to SAMHSA guidelines. You know, the big question, people have asked it, why do they even have this? They didn't even have to put this in the final rule. They could have taken it out totally and had no criteria. But this safely transporting and storing it, and really this is it's sort of an underhanded way to say to people who are unstably housed, who might be homeless, who might be in shelters, that they're not going to be able to get take-home medication, right? This obsession with transporting and safety of medication. And again, if you're unstably housed, how do you do that? I believe actually people can do that, but most clinics have a real issue with people who are unstably housed about how they're going to transport it and store that medication. It doesn't help that it's in liquid form, right? It doesn't help if you have 14 bottles versus getting one bottle that had pills in it, right? And then let's just look at the last one. This is the one that I call it's basically the last thing on a job description, which usually says, and other duties as assigned. It's kind of like a catch-all, right? Your employer can ask you to do anything. They could say, Helen, go mop the floor, right? And so any other criteria that staff comes up with, they can use to assess the ability to take home more bottles of methadone. And I have no doubt clinics will do that. They will add additional criteria or use the criteria that they have already. So these 5 criteria really provide unlimited excuses not to allow people to take home more methadone. And I believe that clinics, I'm not optimistic because they still have this criteria that hundreds of thousands of people, for example, will get more take homes. So I'm just going to go, I'm just going to minimize that. And just to finish up, SAMHSA is not coming to save us. A lot of people wanted to believe, people who really want methadone reform, want to free people from this clinic system. We were really hoping that this would be a game changer. It's not. We have to understand the role that SAMHSA plays, and that is they're part of the problem. The fact that we have a federal bureaucracy in the middle of medical providers and patients who need methadone, that's a problem. The other problem is SAMHSA works intimately with the Drug Enforcement Administration. They work hand in hand with the DEA. The DEA registers every clinic, and SAMHSA certifies every clinic. So they work together. So think about that for a minute. Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration is working with the drug warriors, the agency that is charged with enforcing prohibition, the drug warriors, the police. So this is a really unholy alliance. And anything that SAMHSA wants to change has to be run by the DEA. The other problem with SAMHSA, why they're not coming to save people who take methadone, is their relationship to ATOD. Mel mentioned it. It's the American Association for the Treatment of Opioid Dependence. And they're the trade group for methadone clinics. They're the organization that wants to continue to ensure cartel-like control over methadone, that the only place you can get methadone to treat addiction is in their clinics. And so ATOD loves the final rule. Their president said it's thoughtful, it's enlightened. They have no opposition at all. So the fact that ATOD is on board just speaks volumes about what they think is going to happen or not happen with this new final rule. And really, the problem, because this is in no way fundamental reform, you know, what it does is, or what it doesn't do, it doesn't alter that fundamental relationship where clinics control patients, the stuff that Janet talked about. It's something I talk a lot about, and that is that massive power differential between staff and patients that makes people vulnerable, obedient, subjected to all kinds of abuse. Where do you go to report that, right? Try to go to state soda, see if that will help, but it doesn't alter that fundamentally unbalanced dynamic that, by the way, it doesn't exist in any other healthcare setting, right? Anybody on this webinar, if you don't like your doctor, you can fire her, right? You can say, I'm not going to see you anymore. I'm going to another doctor. You can report that person for unethical behavior. As Mel said, it's an alternative world in the clinics. And so really, to end, the fox is still guarding the hen house. The clinic staff is still very much in control. This is not fundamental change. I do not believe it will lower the rate of overdose deaths. I really don't think that's possible with a clinic system. And really what we need to do, and this was really the hope, you know, that COVID just uncovered this system of oppression, right? 50 years created under the Nixon administration, designed by the DEA, right? How could it not be carceral? But so much of us were thinking during COVID, we're going to get real change and people are going to be liberated. And that is not going to happen with this new final rule. And what really would fundamentally transform this entire situation is if we could move to prescription parity, right? Treat methadone like any other medication. Make it available by the pharmacy. You go there once a month, you pick up your prescription, and life goes on. That is not what we've gotten with the new SAMHSA final rule. They're not coming to save us, and it's essentially the status quo. I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you so much to all our speakers. We do have some comments and questions in the Q&A, but not a ton. So feel free to add yours if you've been weighing whether or not to, because we've got time to answer questions and, of course, comments we'd love to hear. Just want to flag that we're going to be saying goodbye to Corey a little before our time is up. So if he disappears, it's not a tech issue. It's his choice, and he's going to be fine. So let me just start with some fun comments. One is from Pat Denning. I was part of an outpatient methadone program in a private practice office in the early 1990s, pilot project within San Francisco Department of Behavioral Health. It was very easy, successful, and patients were very relieved after 15 plus years of going to the OTP. And another guest, an RN, says, I cannot imagine a patient with diabetes getting upset or agitated at a doctor's office or pharmacy and being told they won't give them their insulin. It seems that ethical boundaries are out of the window for these clinics. I'm an RN working in a homeless shelter. Thanks for these comments. So let's get to some questions. We had two that are simply asking, why can't people get methadone at a pharmacy after they're inducted into the program? Someone want to answer that? Why can't people just get it at pharmacy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to answer that. I mean, it's because of these regulations. You know, so like I said, Congress has this very broad requirement that's it's phrased as saying the Attorney General and the HHS need to create a, special registration process basically for people who are receiving opioids to treat opioid use disorder, essentially. Now, the buprenorphine, but buprenorphine was later sort of carved out of that. We used to have this thing called the X waiver, right? And that thing was called the X waiver because it waived all of those other requirements that apply to, treatment for opioid use disorder. So the answer is that, the agencies have created that system. They decided to create that system through regulations, and they've done that, and they could decide to dismantle that system.
Yep. Another question, it might be for Janet, but I think anyone could probably answer it. Do clinics get $20 a day if patients dose at the window? And where did patients get medications when the clinic was closed on Saturday? And the question is trying to understand if clinics lose money by giving take-homes.
Okay, so every client that comes and doses at that window every day, they get around $20 per patient. Okay, so if you have 200 patients showing up on one day, that's a lot of money. When we closed the clinic on Saturday and Sunday, everybody got 2 days take home. So they only got to bill for one dosing, even though people got 2 days take home. So that was a big loss of money. And they're in the business of making money. So yeah, so yes, they do lose money, but by giving people take homes. I'll tell you a quick story. There was another clinic where a staff person was selling methadone on the street, and to recoup that money that they lost because of the staff person selling the methadone, they put everybody on the clinic back on dailies to make up for the money that was lost that she had been selling methadone on the street. So.
Thank you, Janet. So we've got a couple reactions like, yes, how do I advocate for change? What can we do? I want to maybe try to answer this specific question. How is prescription parity a solution when the medical system is equally carceral for anyone who uses drugs? I understand the SAMHSA regs better, but I didn't hear actual solutions. So maybe Helen, Mel, one of you want to go deeper into a vision for a solution?
Sorry, can I jump in really quickly and just kind of address the last question first? I would say, right, those are bizarre incentives, and it seems like they don't really make sense for the payer either. And depending on the state and the clinic, Medicaid is often a big payer. So there are some examples. For example, New York State recently moved to sort of what they call like a global payment scheme. So they're not paying you, every time you go to the clinic. They're paying the clinic a flat rate, per patient. Obviously there are potential issues with that, but it's not set in stone anywhere that you get $20 every time the person shows up at the clinic. That's just how the agreements between the payer, which is almost always, which is often an insurance company. Obviously there are really abusive, kind of terrible cash only clinics and so on. But those can also be addressed through through either, through state regulation generally. But the end is like, there's nothing set in stone about that, right? And this is like another example of like, if we were really serious about this, we would recognize that that's a bizarre incentive. The only people who benefit from that system are the clinic owners and operators. It doesn't benefit the patients. It doesn't benefit the insurers or, the public payers. It's bizarre. And it's totally unnecessary. It can be changed, through regulations in various ways. So I just wanted to know, like, because it's a question lots of people ask, like, why do they do it that way? And the answer is that, like, OTP operators are a powerful lobbying tool, particularly at the state level. And there's not an organized group of people who are showing up and saying, like, this is bananas. Stop doing it this way. So sorry, I just wanted to address that last question. The current question, I think, is also super important.
That was helpful. Thank you. So I think the current question, we've got some comments about MOTA. Is it all it's cracked up to be? It's not really going to benefit me. Maybe that could be lumped in with the question of what is the solution? Tell me more. What can I do? Mel or Helen, and of course,
real quick, I want to talk about how how is prescription parity a solution when the medical system is equally carceral for anyone who uses drugs? Sorry, I'm still back there. I mean, the medical system, like, we're not going to like solve drug user stigma with the methadone dispensing, like, but we've got to look at, I mean, is it making someone go in daily dose at a clinic outside the medical system? Like, I mean, I don't understand, like, that's like, I don't know what the exact solution is, but I know we can think of something better than what we currently have. Like, and I mean, I go to other doctors, like, I'm experiencing this everywhere I go, but then I get it extra at the clinic. Like, that's, I think, what we need to like focus on. But yeah, I don't, what was we were talking about solutions, prescription parity. That's my favorite solution. Open to other ideas, but I think we need to be focusing on solutions and not like these pretty PR SAMHSA ATOD solutions, like real solutions. And that has not been the focus of anything up to date, really. So I think that's a good thing to start talking about.
Thanks, Mel.
Yeah, I mean, prescription parity is a very simple idea, right? Just go to the pharmacy and pick up your medication. That's what it's all about. People who take methadone are already, I'm sure some of them are going to the pharmacy to pick up other medications. So why can't you just pick it up to treat addiction, right? Now, I know I don't have to tell anybody here, our healthcare system is in crisis, right? It has been forever. But, we can't wait, nor should we wait until there's some kind of massive shift in how healthcare is delivered in the United States to end this apartheid siloed clinic system, right? We don't have to wait for that. And so it just makes sense. And if you want to stop overdose deaths, which is what all of us want to do, it has to be made easier to get methadone. And that's what the pharmacy does, right? When you can go there and get a prescription for a month, that's life-changing. And more people, I believe, would be alive. Now, I'm not going to pretend it's not going to be a fight to get to that, because people are saying there's vested interest in the status quo. And that is venture capitalists creating super methadone chains who are making lots of profits. I'm going to recognize that up front, but it doesn't mean what we're talking about isn't a solution, right? And again, I don't think I have to tell many people on this webinar, there are other countries that do it better, places like Australia, Britain, where people can go to a pharmacy. And again, upfront, not going to say those are perfect systems, but for me, the problems that could come along with a pharmacy dispensing, those are much better problems to have. Because the other thing that people should remember is when you go to a pharmacy, you actually do have power, right? You have power as a patient in that pharmacy, whereas in a clinic, you don't, because of that power differential. So prescription parity ends that dynamic and liberates people. But again, you know, we should expect problems and we should prepare for those problems. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Thank you, Helen. Another maybe quick question could be for Corey or Janet. Is it true that anyone can open an OTP regardless of medical license or history providing care for people who use drugs?
I can only speak for Delaware. We've had a lot of practitioners open private practices, primary care practices, and they do a lot of MAT. We had a couple of clinics that were doing, you know, private clinics that were doing, or private doctors' offices that were doing methadone, but they do not do it anymore. I think Mel made reference to somebody made reference to a private clinic. I guess it was in the questions, and how differently they were treated in that doctor's office, and that was the experience here. But for whatever reason, they did not last. You know, and they were gone within a couple of years. So.
Yeah, it's all state regulations. I mean, the federal regulations just say that each OTP needs to have what they call a program sponsor and a medical director. The medical director needs to be a physician, but, you know, like Janet was saying, you know, that could be somebody who just, you know, shows up from time to time and signs off. There's no requirement that they be on site or anything like that. I mean, it's a tricky question because, you know, some states have taken it on themselves to like incredibly overregulate OTPs, you know, to the point of simply, you know, banning new ones at all. So, I mean, you know, kind of get to this, you know, back to this question of if our goal was to make sure that everybody who wants high quality methadone is able to access it, you know, like affordably and conveniently, like what would that system look like? But none of the, you know, people who are making these policies are asking that question. So none of the regulations reflect that, right? But like, we could, like, there's nothing that prevents the system from being run in that way. It's just that this is like everybody's been saying, right? Like the system was not designed to do that, and so it doesn't do that.
I agree with you, Corey. The other thing is that they don't hire people with any credentials. I mean, even if you had your medical director who didn't make every daily decision of the clinic, but the people that run the clinic, I mean, I would bet you that I was probably the only LCSW in the state of Delaware, and probably plenty of other places, that was running a methadone clinic. You know, so if you have people that are running these places who, you know, aren't accountable to a code of ethics and upholding their license, they could do, you know, they can just do whatever they want. And so one of the, you know, ways to maybe at least remedy some of this is to start pulling in licensed professionals who have, you know, some sympathy for what's going on here. Because they tend not to go to work at those places because they don't pay people enough to work at those places. So, you know, that's another option, is to, you know, get people who are invested in healthcare and treatment.
Thank you, Janet. Just want to read a comment from Lisa. I told my counselor I was thinking about getting ketamine infusions for my debilitating depression, and did she know if the clinic had a problem with that? Figuring they would, of course. And she said, well, Sacred Heart is an abstinence-based program. And I said, no, it's not. NA is an abstinence-based program. The whole point of medications to treat OUD is that they work, and abstinence-based 12-step programs don't work. And then she went on about studies show, blah, blah, blah. Power differential. I'm going to read another question/comment from Blake. As a current peer recovery specialist and an MAT patient of methadone specifically, is there anything that clients of methadone clinics need to be aware of? Perhaps things some of my clients need to be aware of, as well as myself, as far as rights, responsibilities, maybe examples of things frequently done unethically or against standard that clients of methadone clinics need to be aware of. Also, what can folks do who are victims of their rights being violated outside of simply filing a complaint within the clinic? Like, is there an advocacy organization or some other place aside from the methadone clinic where clients can report violations of rights and ethics? I'm gonna open that to anyone.
I mean, I would say the answer to that is no, because if you call, your state licensing folks who oversee the clinics, if they say the clinic is licensed and meeting the standards of licensure, then they can't, they'll say they're fine. There's nothing you can do about that. And they can turn anything around that somebody does at a clinic, a client, and it's the client's fault. It is never the clinic's fault. I mean, they put adults who go to these clinics on what they call behavioral contracts. Again, this is a nurse thing. If someone comes in and doesn't behave in a way the nurse perceives as appropriate or age appropriate, you might have been getting a week take home, but let me tell you now, you're signing this contract, for bad behavior, and you're back on dailies. So, and that's perfectly within the rights of the clinic to do something like that.
Thank you, Janet. Anyone else?
I guess I'll just add that, I think we need to organize, as methadone, clients. We're not really patients at the methadone clinic. I think we need to organize and, help inform each other. And, every day when I go to the clinic, I literally, make it a point to try to talk to somebody about, I'll send them the methadone manifesto, for example, or I'll send them a filter article. And I really think that those of us that have the privilege and the maybe our, our voice, like you said, you are a peer specialist, people will listen to you, so we need to be using our voices to fight back against this, because it's abuse and it's inhumane and it's a joke to call it medical care. And we need to at least inform people about what's actually going on if we want to change anything. So I think we need to, as patients, we need to organize something. And I don't know what that looks like exactly either, but I'm glad somebody brought that up.
Thank you, Mel. Yeah, a couple of questions about what can we do. I just want to say that if people want to take action and join us, the Methadone Clinic Abolition Collective, you can add us on Twitter at Free Methadone. And to get more involved, that's probably the best way. Helen, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I just want to come back on that real quick. I mean, this is a real conundrum for patients, and it's something I've heard in my reporting all across the country. And one of the pain points is when people get their take homes taken away from them, right? The take homes are everything, and they can be taken away. People need to remember that, right? I didn't say that earlier, but what they give, they can take away. So if you do get 28, you might not be able to keep that for 5 years, right? So there's lots of ways to get those take homes. And I've talked to several people who that was the thing, getting the take homes taken away from them, because it's devastating, right? If you have 14 days and now you're back to daily dosing, it rocks your world in a way that it should not, right? And they've gone to the state SOTA. So the State Opioid Treatment Authority, SOTA, you can go to the SOTA and lodge a grievance, and they're supposed to investigate it. And it's really the luck of the draw, whether that SOTA can effectively advocate for you to get your medication back or address whatever the problem is. It's really the luck of the draw. And so people are really, really vulnerable to that kind of abuse. And it's one of the reasons I want to close these down. People shouldn't have to go there and be in that be in that position. So it's really hard to fight back as an individual. And it would be good if methadone patients could organize in their own interest. But I understand the challenges, right?
And if they do something like that, Helen, organize, and the clinic finds out about it, they're going to pay for it. The client is going to pay for it, as a troublemaker. You're trying to make us look bad. So it's a no-win situation. I was sitting here listening. I'm thinking, if it would be possible to have a group of clients. I mean, one way I see it, and I mean, I live in a very small state. You easily can get to your state representatives. And I know that they don't know what goes on in these clinics, but if they knew, and we had a group of clients who would go with a professional to talk to them, and that they would all remain anonymous, that the person that they were going to had to understand the need to do that. I think those are the things that can raise awareness of the people, of our state legislatures, and then, bump it up to our federal people, because they don't know. They do not know. So, there's a way to maintain anonymity, but have a voice of the client. It's a way to go.
Thank you, Janet. So I just want to acknowledge that MOTA has come up in this chat. It's a bill in the House and Senate, modernizing the Opioid Treatment Access Act. People have asked about it. Some thoughts about it have been voiced. We are going to be doing an upcoming webinar about it, but I do feel that it's relevant to discuss it briefly now, because I wish this were more of a talking situation, but it's a webinar. So it's not really conversational, but there are many people fighting for methadone reform right now, and some folks are strong advocates of passing this bill. And their group is here in the Q&A. Our group that sponsored this webinar, we are opposed to the bill for a number of reasons that we're going to lay out soon in a webinar. But maybe right now, if someone can just explain what's problematic about MOTA and why it's not worth supporting, in our opinion. Is that cool? Or yeah.
I can start. I'll just start by saying this is a terrible bill. This is not a bill that can address the historic rate of opioid overdose deaths. The number one reason that it can't is it strictly limits who can prescribe methadone. So what MOTA does, it allows a small group of board certified addiction doctors to prescribe methadone in their office, and the person to go to the pharmacy to pick it up, completely or almost completely bypassing the clinic system. So that kind of sounds good, right? But when you realize maybe there's 6,000 board certified addiction specialists in the United States, they're not evenly distributed across the country. So how many people can this small group actually get methadone to, right? That's the first problem. Anybody should be able to prescribe methadone. It shouldn't be this tiny group that continues to silo methadone, right? That's the first problem. The second one is the DEA. It allows, the DEA will be registering these doctors who decide to participate in this. That's a huge problem. Doctors, understandably, don't like DEA surveillance. This is an additional layer of surveillance of doctors. And I believe that will lead a number of them to say, I'm not going to do this, kind of like they do with buprenorphine, right? So that dooms the efficacy of it. And then the last one is the poison pill in MOTA that allows the state, the SOTA, to go to the DEA and say, stop registering doctors in my state to do the office-based and then the pharmacy pickup. So we know clinics will go, individuals will go to the SOTA and say, stop registering, which then winnows down even more the number of doctors who can provide methadone in this office-based setting. So it's set up to fail. And it's also, we know, it's going to increase racial disparities in access, because who can go to see specialists in our country, right? Who can see them? Do they take Medicaid? Not a lot. Specialists don't, that's my experience. Specialists don't like Medicaid, right? Vast majority of people who take methadone. So it's going to increase racial disparities. And we can't have that. We cannot pass legislation that is racist. So I'll stop there. We're going to do an entire webinar because we know there's a division in the methadone reform movement around legislation.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. I'm tempted to say more, but also I'm tempted to not say more about it. Mel?
I mean, it basically creates a caste system of methadone patients. Like, you have these privileged patients, and I mean, I'm not saying that it's like, yeah, that would be great if people could access their methadone from a doctor in an office and pick it up at the pharmacy, right? That's like what we're saying. But MODA doesn't do that. And it's not the amount of people that it's going to impact positively, like, it's just like these SAMHSA guidelines. Like, it's kind of a joke. It's like it's not going far enough. Like, we can do so much better. We should be able to do so much better than this. Like who do you think is going to be going to a specialist and getting their prescription at the pharmacy? And who do you think is going to be stuck daily dosing at the clinic at 5:30 every morning? Like, let's be real. Like, and I feel like we have to acknowledge that, like, because they're claiming, one of their claims in MODA is that it reduces racial disparities, right? But I don't see any evidence for that. I mean, I'd love to look at it if there is any, but yeah, that's my 2 cents about that.
Mel, I really appreciate the analogy with a caste system, because you are so right about that. And if any of you haven't read the book called Caste yet, read it, because it's unbelievable. And this is a perfect example of people who get stuck at a certain level in that caste. And it's more about caste than it even is about race or ethnicity. It's just a whole interesting thing of who gets it and who doesn't. No?
Thank you, Janet. And just to Leah's question, what would dream legislation be? A bill to abolish methadone clinics, or at the very least fighting to get a bill that abolishes methadone clinics, because you do have to make compromises with legislators, but you got to really start with what you want, because passing a bill is a very, very, very heavy lift. And based on how MODA has been winnowed away to benefit so few people, it's clear that the objective of the legislators is to pass a bill, not to reform methadone, but to pass a bill, because that's a win for them. They get in office, they need to do things. But for our side, the reason why we're fighting so hard is because we really care about methadone not harming people. So we can't let someone pass a bill that's a win for them and a loss for us, because they're not going to come back to the table. If they walk away with a win, they're not going to come back to help us when we feel that it was a loss. So the notion of this bill being a step in the right direction is false. Bills do not begin reform, they end reform. It's the last step. You fight like hell to pass a bill, and you give it all, because that's the thing you want to win. You make your compromises that you can live with. You withdraw if the compromises are too much, but don't have the illusion that all the work that you just did to secure a win for your so-and-so legislator is going to mean they're going to come back to the table with you and rewrite it so it's really what you want. So this is why we're having a MODA webinar, because we want to go into detail about the bill, and we also want to talk about our position from a political strategy perspective. And just to give a little tease, we're going to have Helena Hansen join us and some other folks. So we're really excited about that. Anyway, I think the last maybe question that does come up often, and then we can end after this, is, okay, where is the educational component in all of this? Because just saying we can go to the pharmacy is naive, because pharmacists don't want to prescribe bupe, and there is still a power differential when people cannot just change their pharmacy. So the question around, is the pharmacy that great? Did y'all answer that already? I don't think so, maybe.
I mean, the pharmacy's not prescribing anything. That's not what we're talking about. Yeah, I don't really understand that question, but so I think we can move on.
Well, I want to say something about that, because I want to start with, the reality is thousands upon thousands of people are picking up buprenorphine at the pharmacy. We know that. We also know there are problems in some parts of the country with people getting buprenorphine, with the pharmacy stocking it. And a lot of that has to do with the DEA. The DEA is intimidating pharmacists, they're intimidating pharmacies, and into not carrying a buprenorphine, right? And we have to take that on. It's not naive to want people to be able to go to the pharmacy to get their medication. It's about normalizing it. And I believe what we need in this country, because it's actually not just buprenorphine that people are in some parts of the country are having trouble accessing. It's benzodiazepines, right? It's ADHD medications. Again, here the DEA is implicated in this because they've cut the quota for ADHD meds, right? As they have for opioids, right? You know, if we could get the DEA out of people's lives, out of methadone, that would make it so much easier. But even though they're still involved, it doesn't mean we shouldn't try to have a pharmacy-based system. And when we have the 600,000 people who take methadone going to the pharmacy, along with the rest of us, no longer siloed, there's a potential to build a consumer organization, to have solidarity with one another, right? The people who have trouble getting their medications, there's a lot of them. We have an opportunity when we bring all those folks who are now going to clinics into the pharmacy system to build an organization that takes on the stigma and discrimination that some pharmacists display. I don't dispute that, but let's not forget there are a lot of amazing pharmacists out there who want to work with people who have substance use. And there's even, you know, a study, it was done not that long ago, Tracy Green's study, where actually pharmacists inducted people in the pharmacy on buprenorphine, right? It's another place that people could go to get medication, right? There's a pharmacy in every community, and it worked really well. Well, we could do that with methadone. Pharmacists could induct people on methadone right there in the pharmacy, get it up and running. So we need to think creatively about some of the problems that we're going to encounter. And I don't believe we can overcome a lot of these problems. But the first step is to bring 600,000 people into the mainstream of the world. That's liberation.
On that note, I think we can close. Panelists, I don't see any more fun questions or comments. Thank you so much, everyone who shared their experience. I realize everyone can read this, not just me, but so I know everyone's read the comments. Really, very enlightening. But to our panelists, if you want to say anything in closing, and then we'll end.
I'm just grateful to have been able to be a part of this. So thank you, Helen, for including me. You know that this is something that's become near and dear to my heart. So however I can stay involved, I would like to do that.
Thanks, Janet.
I'm just really happy that we're all here talking about it. This is, you know, these are the conversations that we need to be having. So encourage everybody else to come join us and speak up, because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a lot more than what we're doing right now. So let's do it.
Let's free methadone. That's what I'm optimistic about. We actually can. This is not reinventing the wheel. We don't need $20 billion investment from Congress to make this transition. And I'm optimistic that we can do that. And we want people to join us in ending the culture of cruelty and freeing people who take methadone.
Thank you, friends, everyone, for being here and sticking it out with us. Twitter, if you want to get more involved, you can DM us at Free Methadone on Twitter. We love to stay in touch. We have access to that account. Mel, if you want to throw your handle in there, otherwise you're part of the Free Methadone. So, but
Yeah, that's all good. You can just find us over there. You'll find me later.
Right on. Thanks, everyone. And we'll keep you informed about the upcoming MODA webinar as soon as we have a date. And we're signing off. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for coming, everyone.